and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant, and I'm thrilled to have you join me today for a really crucial conversation, one that's been, again, I'm kind of ripping something from the headlines of social media and the environments that the BDSM and lifestyle community thrive on in the virtual sense. I am talking about things that happen in the realm of human connection. And few concepts are as vital and important as consent and boundaries, something that we often talk about within the lifestyle on a daily basis. We talk about it in our negotiations, our scenes, interactions of our relationships. Now, at the core, consent transcends a simple yes or no to a question. It's a fundamental understanding and agreement between individuals rooted in respect and mutual understanding. This understanding is paramount in all aspects of life, including and especially within the communities such as the lifestyle community. Now, today, I'm going to do a deep dive into this intricate dynamics of consent and boundaries, specifically within our lifestyle community. Now, while popular discourse often narrows the discussion of consent to sexual interactions, its scope is broader. It's got a very wide range. But consent permeates our actions, our conversations, and relationships, and it shapes the very fabric of how we engage within the world. Understanding boundaries is completely indispensable. If you don't know what a boundary is, you're going to probably have problems in life. Now, establishing and respecting personal boundaries is an affirmation of our own bodily autonomy. It's an affirmation of our needs and our limits, and it forms the basis of healthy connections. So I want you all to sit back as we kind of explore these crucial concepts and how they intertwine and how they influence the dynamics of our relationships. And, honestly, how we can foster a culture of understanding and respect, not only with somebody else, but within the community itself. And that's really a vital concept, because when we start talking about things that are not always completely nuanced, we have to be able to hear from multiple sides and not just be subjective in our approach. Now, understanding consent and boundaries isn't just for our immediate relationships. It is a step towards a more compassionate and empathetic world. It is an invitation to reflect, learn, and evolve. Now, I think I want to start out with, we need to start understanding the definitions of things even when they share similarities. So, in the realm of our human interactions, two fundamental principles lay the groundwork for healthy relationships and the interactions we have with one another: consent and boundaries. Now, these principles extend far beyond a simple yes or no, as I talked about before, and they have profound implications on our interactions, especially within communities like the BDSM community. Now, as we begin to understand these concepts at their core, we have to distinguish them from the misconceptions that tend to arise and to shed light on the pivotal roles in our lives. We start by exploring the definitions of consent and boundaries and breaking down their intricacies to foster a far more informed and respectful understanding of these words, so they're not becoming to the point in a conversation or our dialogue with each other that they are reduced, or, as I'm saying a lot more lately, they hold a reductionist value. So, consent, what is it? Now, in the realm of our interpersonal relationships, the concept of consent is foundational. It's not just this simple idea of saying yes to something or saying no to something. It's complex, and it's a crucial agreement that shapes our interactions, especially within the community itself. Now, according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, consent is an affirmative agreement to engage in various sexual or non-sexual activities. It's not merely an agreement. It's enthusiastic. It's clearly communicated, and it's an ongoing yes, with a crucial caveat that past interactions should never be presumed for or as consent. Adding to this, the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom emphasizes that consent must be freely given. It's knowledgeable. It's informed. Consent is an ongoing process in which individuals have the liberty to modify or revoke their consent at any point, at any time, for any reason. Now, this aligns with the legal shift towards yes means yes, where laws now emphasize that consent should be affirmative, conscious, and voluntary with clear understanding that no always means no. Now, legally, the paradigm has shifted from no means no to yes means yes. In 2014, laws were enacted defining consent as an affirmative consent standard, wherein both parties must conscientiously and voluntarily agree to sexual activity. Affirmative consent mandates understanding a no unequivocally. Silence is not consent, and consent can be reversed at any point. In essence, here consent must be informed. We understand it's enthusiastic and it's totally freely agreed upon and specific. Now, campaigns like the one by Planned Parenthood emphasize that consent must be freely agreed upon without pressure or influence from drugs or alcohol. We can't be asleep. It is a irreversible choice, and it's specific, and most importantly, and it can always be withdrawn. These definitions from multiple sources that a lot of us rely on are crucial for the understanding and training, but regulating consent is equally pivotal. So, let's shift the focus now to understanding what boundaries are, the other pillar of healthy relationships, and more so, a healthy understanding of who we are and our own personal autonomy. Now, when we talk about boundaries, we're referring to the psychological lines that define the limits and expectations in our interactions according and with other people. That doesn't matter if it's family, if it's friends, if it's personal relationships. All of these things, we can set boundaries. Now, when we're talking about boundaries, and these psychological lines that define these limits, we have to understand we tend to garner this definition more from places like the APA, the American Psychological Association. Now, setting boundaries is an essential skill for healthy emotional and psychological functioning. It involves communicating our needs, desires, and limits to other people. And again, that doesn't matter who the people are. It doesn't matter if it is our family, if it's a stranger on the street, if it is our friends that are coming over and, they're going to raid our fridge, or somebody we're dating. Boundaries serve as guidelines for what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in our interactions and our relationships. Imagine your boundaries as property lines of your psychological landscape to delineate where you end and where other people begin. Now, boundaries can have limits. I can't set my personal boundary, to 30 feet that everybody else must stay within a limit of. That's not realistic, right? But we need to understand this. Establishing clear and healthy boundaries doesn't mean you're going to build a wall or shut others out. It does mean you have to recognize your own needs, your values, and your limits and effectively communicate them. Boundaries can pertain to various aspects of our lives, such as the physical, emotional, or interpersonal boundaries that we often set, especially ones that get set when you're working through therapy, for example. You're learning how to put healthy boundaries in place. Now, for instance, a physical boundary could be your personal space or your comfort with physical touch. An emotional boundary might relate to what topics you're comfortable discussing and how you express your emotions. Interpersonal boundaries define the dynamics and expectations inside of your relationships. Now, how we navigate and communicate these boundaries significantly influences the quality of our relationships and our overall well-being. As I keep moving forward through this, we're going to continue to explore this critical aspect of our human interaction. And I want to shed some more light on some of the misconceptions that I've been seeing for a while now on social media, and hopefully get us to the point where we're promoting a deeper understanding of consent and boundaries through this, especially as now we have a pretty clear definition of what boundaries are. So there have been multiple posts, but one that really caught my attention the other day, and I want to bring this up. I'm not going to be specific on the post, but it's always, they always carry a common theme, and they're espousing something, and then when they conflate the issues, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, we are blurring the lines. And it often tells me that somebody doesn't even understand what they're saying anymore. It's like other buzzwords that when we start throwing them out there, we just throw them as a way to become argumentative and hold a higher stance than any, and put somebody on the defensive, and then at any point to try to refute that with truth is seen as somebody being emotional or unhinged. So let's get into this post analyzation, or actually multiple posts lately that I'm looking at. Now, the common issue that I've often encountered within communities like fetish.com or FetLife, Twitter, even Instagram, is the conflation of consent and boundaries. And this isn't an isolated incident. It's a misconception that emerges from time to time that when they're doing this on online platforms, they're trying to maybe draw attention to themselves or draw attention to an issue that they think overlaps. Many discussions related to consent can sometimes inadvertently shift into the territory of boundaries, or vice versa. This conflation can lead to misunderstandings and affect how I perceive consent in diverse contexts. Now, the specific post I came across that echoes this misunderstanding highlights instances where the author, the person who wrote it, seemingly sees a boundary violation as a consent violation. Now, this becomes the crucial part. We have to dissect such scenarios with a balanced and neutral lens, that reflecting on the nuances and educating ourselves on clear distinctions between these fundamental aspects of healthy relationships, and what is and what is not the difference between a boundary and consent. Now, I have a little bit more conservative views, and there's nothing wrong with that. I balance myself that way. So when I approach discussions on consent and boundaries with the importance of traditional values and personal responsibility in mind, it becomes essential to emphasize that respecting boundaries is a fundamental aspect of maintaining healthy relationships, but it shouldn't be confused with consent. Why, you might ask? Consent is that conscious and enthusiastic agreement to engage in activities, and it's crucial to differentiate this from respecting the stated limits. One particular concern that was raised in this post was whether simply initiating contact, like saying hello, sending a message, or sending a photo, can be perceived as violating consent. Now, addressing this concern is crucial. It's vital. It's why I'm talking about this today. I had other topics in mind, but I think we're getting to such a point in this world where, say, and especially younger generations, have taken so many buzzwords and they want to apply them to everything. And unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of issue. Now, in the context of online platforms, reaching out to somebody is maybe seen as the initial step, but it shouldn't be equated to violating someone's consent. Consent, as I see it, involves mutual and clear agreement between the parties in establishing contact in part of the process of communication and connection. However, respecting someone's stated boundaries and preferences and communication guidelines is equally important. Now, would I agree that the person probably overstepped a boundary? Absolutely. But to say that they violated someone's consent, the first thing that I'm starting to think is I'm putting you in the realm of sexual assault victims, or someone who's actually been physically harmed. I can't put those two things together, that the logic there doesn't compute. But this is where we are seeing the line. Now, would I agree her boundaries were crossed, or this particular, I think there was another one where by some guy was saying that his boundaries were crossed. All of these people have the same theme in common, that you keep talking about words that are seemingly similar, but they're not the same. And this is where the issue gets confusing and becomes problematic. If we explore the repercussions of confusing consent with not respecting stated boundaries, this confusion can lead to significant harm. And it's not just within our community, but also the broader relationship dynamics that people get into. The potential confusion and the harm that emerge from this conflation are critical aspects we have to understand, and more importantly, we have to address. Firstly, the potential confusion and harm resulting in this conflation are considerable. When consent and boundaries are misunderstood or blurred, it becomes challenging to navigate relationships effectively. Misinterpreting a yes as blanket approval without considering the specific boundaries set by the individual can lead to unintended harm. Now, what is something else inside of the lifestyle that is crucial for us? We agree, for many of us that are involved in the physical aspects, to hurt. We don't agree to harm. No one agrees to harm. Now, it's crucial to grasp these nuances of consent and recognize that it involves a comprehensive understanding of each person's comfort levels and limits. This misunderstanding doesn't just stay confined to the individual level. It permeates relationships and communications within the community, and then, like any other parasitic idea, it seems to start taking over and it becomes the thought du jour. Trust, an essential foundation of relationships, then can be compromised. And when there's a lack of clarity regarding consent and boundaries, if individuals believe that consent encompasses everything, including respected stated limits, we are now starting to erode trust. And moreover, misinterpretations hinder open communication. They hinder fostering healthy relationships. The entire point, we're interacting with someone in the first place. Now, to shed more light on these potential consequences, let's consider a scenario for a moment. Now, imagine an online interaction where one person initiates or attempts to initiate a conversation, and upon receiving a response, assumes that the other party is consenting to all forms of communication. Now, this misinterpretation, which does happen quite frequently, can result in excessive and unwelcome messages, making the recipient uncomfortable and potentially damaging the budding connection. And I don't disagree. I understand people don't always approach things with the best of intentions. Why? That's a whole different episode, and I'm not going to go into that today. But it's vital to differentiate between initiating contact and obtaining consent. Understanding that consent is a conscious agreement to engage in activities doesn't mean I need your consent to send you an email, especially when we are in a social media landscape. You have more control as the recipient than does the sender. If you don't want people commenting on photographs that you're posting online for social media, most recently a celebrity who's going through a separation and potentially a divorce, it's very famous, well-known actor, shut off his DMs, he shut off all communications, he didn't allow anybody to comment on his post. He has control. Most social media platforms give their users a wide berth of control. Shut down your emails. When you make a post, no one can see it. Or you're posting for yourself, you're posting for your friends only, or you don't post at all. If you post into a public forum, you are, by proxy, inviting engagement. And depending on what you post and the title of your post, you are going to invite more engagement. Do I agree that people shouldn't be subjected to some of the commentary that they receive? Absolutely. But unfortunately, we're in a world where not everybody abides by the same forms, rules, and regulations that we hold to ourselves for a certain standard. And we can't do that. If we want to limit ourselves and live in a bubble, then maybe we shouldn't be online. But if we are online, we do have to understand that the world it's open to a lot of people's thoughts. I'm not saying that I agree with what everybody says, but we have to be realistic and understand that people are going to say things that come out of their mouth, especially when we are, on average, asking for engagement online. Now, if we look at another scenario that involves social gathering within the lifestyle community, if someone assumes that attending an event implies blanket consent for interaction, be it physical or verbal, it can lead to discomfort and breaches of personal boundaries. Now, recognizing that boundaries are equally important and should be respected, irrespective of the context, is key to fostering a safe and consensual environment, which is what the goal of our lifestyle is. So, How do we navigate consent and boundaries in digital spaces? Well, digital communication and globalization is everywhere. It's been this way for, over 20, 30 years now. And the lines between consent and boundaries can sometimes become blurred. Now, we have to dissect these concepts and understand their dynamics, particularly within the context of online interactions. In our increasingly connected world, technology has reshaped the permeability of those boundaries. In a digital realm, in a space where communication constantly flows, every thought that someone has is put into the sphere of the internet, it makes it essential to comprehend the nuances of consent and boundaries. However, it is important to distinguish between respecting someone's boundaries and violating their consent. Now, simply reaching out to someone in the digital space doesn't equate to a breach of consent. Now, I would argue it would rather be a potential breach of their stated boundaries, and that should go without saying. If I don't want somebody interaction and you're reaching out to me on my professional profile, I tell people I welcome you to add me as a friend or send me a message. Follow me if you would like, but I do ask for the interactions to be polite. And so I've stated what my boundaries are, and I've said you are more than welcome to do any one of the following things. So understanding consent in the digital realm involves recognizing the necessity of clear, effective communication, even online. What I don't have control over is whether or not somebody's going to read that. And that's really, I think, what the problem is for a lot of people, that they realize they're saying these things, and then they're not necessarily disregarding it. People have become lazy and are just getting involved in interactions. And unfortunately, the other part of what I think is fueling this is because places like FetLife or Fetish.com or others have opened the door and fully embraced sex work in whatever forms, and OnlyFans or many videos. And I'm not dogging those places. I really don't care. I will never engage in those spheres. But this has also brought over the influx, because those people are marketing themselves, has brought the influx of people from Tinder that believe that this is the type of interaction that people in our lifestyle tend to follow because of the explicit content that they post. The problem is one set of behavior influences another. No, I am not saying that the people who do OnlyFans are completely responsible, but do they have a hand in it? Absolutely. If you deny that, if you don't think that their behavior influences anybody, well, then only places like OnlyFans wouldn't exist. And that's just clear and understated. It would be places like Pornhub or the other pornographic websites that are out there wouldn't exist, because behavior is dictated by what is going on in society. Now, understanding this digital realm involves recognizing clear necessity and these things that we have to do and not do. And we need to keep in mind that consent always and must be enthusiastic. It's got to be clearly communicated a yes. And that is ongoing and can be revoked at any point. This is distinct from respecting someone's boundaries, which initially entails honoring their preferences and guidelines for communication. If someone tells me they don't want to be bound with rope because they don't like rope, that's their boundary. We will often say that that's a limit, but that's their boundary. Now, if I blow right past that and tie them up with rope, I've not only disregarded their boundary, but have now violated their consent. But if they tell me they just don't like rope, let's just say now it's rope in any form, because that's kind of my proclivity, but then they bring rope out and they want to start talking to me about rope, now they're just violating my boundary, because I've already said I don't want to discuss it at all. But they haven't violated my consent. They're still free to talk about rope. I just don't have to be a part of it. Now, where does this differentiation come in? Consent and boundaries are interconnected, but they're distinct, and they're distinct inside of their aspects of a relationship, both online and offline. Consent is active agreement, and it's freely given, and it's informed, and it's specific, while boundaries revolve around our personal limits and what we're comfortable with doing. Ignoring someone's stated boundaries is a violation of their personal autonomy, but it doesn't equate to violating their consent. And the consent is, and I'm really trying to drive this point home, is typically associated with engagement and action, where boundaries are parameters for a specific person set for that person within any given context. Now, if we look at these misconceptions in the most extreme cases in the digital world, especially one that arose from regarding consent and boundaries, a common misconception is that reaching out to someone with a prior interaction violates their consent, like this whole post surround, this topic brought up. However, this misinterpretation of consent completely is a misinterpretation. If there's no real specific action going to be going on besides just an email, reaching out, if we're now including reaching out as an action that can be met with a consent or denied a consent violation just because we're sending somebody an email or we're sending them a photo. And I'm not saying that you should be sending photos. You shouldn't do that. My interactions are always polite with people. Greetings, hi, hello, how are you? I'm asking them. If they don't hear back from them, then I don't hear back from them. I'm not worried, and I just move on. I also don't get hostile. Again, different interactions for different things. But in extreme cases, individuals may equate online experiences to such violations as like claiming being raped in a virtual environment. And you might think that's a little bit extreme, but such extreme statements can be hurtful, and they undermine the gravity of actual traumatic experiences that distort the understanding of consent and boundaries in the first place. You might be wondering, what am I talking about? How are we being raped in a virtual environment? Well, such was the case with Meta and their new virtual reality, that a person, a user, reported they were raped by another user. That's a huge word to say. There was no physical contact. She couldn't physically feel anything. Would I say absolutely that her boundaries were crossed? Yes. But there's no rape. And we keep doing these things. We're calling it e-rape. It doesn't exist. But we're creating these terms so we can shift the conversation towards the way that we want to gear it and put anyone who says anything different constantly on the defensive. Now, understanding these nuances and the differences between consent and boundaries is imperative for all of our interactions, whether they're in the real time or online. It allows us to engage respectfully, hopefully, and honor others people's preferences and foster a more informed and empathetic digital community that we all seem to live in on a global scale. But can we expect everybody to act the way we want? No, we can't. That's the part about social media and the way it works. We don't control everybody's interactions, nor do I want to limit their speech. I don't have to agree with it, and I also don't have to follow it. If someone is saying something that's hateful and bigoted, I may try to understand why they feel that way, why they are threatened. But that's going to be more the scientific part of me wanting to understand. But I don't have to keep engaging, because if that's all their rhetoric is, they hold nothing for me, and then they're going to just pan out to a small audience. Some hate speech is now illegal, and I agree with that. But we can't just start saying everything is hateful or everything violates my consent and we need a law against it, because eventually we're going to get to the point no one can say anything to anyone without a third or fourth party mediator in between. And that's not human connectivity. That is not how society works. The reasons behind this, I've talked about it in the past, but I'm not going to go back into that today. And I might leave that for a future show, but I'm well beyond trying to explain what my view is of human interaction in the 21st century and where we are at today in the emotional relationship landscape between interactions between two people. So I'm going to leave you all with some final thoughts here. I dove into this distinction between these two topics, consent and boundaries, essentially the aspects of what a healthy relationship within our community is and beyond. I've talked about these definitions emphatically, emphasizing that while consent involves our clear and enthusiastic agreement for various activities, Boundaries are the lines that we set for ourselves and the comfort in any given situation. And they are distinct. They share similarities, but they are distinct. We have to start avoiding these common misconceptions of equating respect and boundaries, of equating respecting boundaries and violating consent, and a misunderstanding that can have far-reaching consequences within our community and in relationships. Because the moment we start doing that, we go out there and say, oh, this person did X, Y, and Z. And that's actually in the reality may not even happen. But we see it that way because we don't even understand the terminology we're using. I'm not saying that's happening in every case. But, if someone said hello to you while they walk by you at the street, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, well, they verbally violated my consent by speaking to me. It just doesn't work that way. So I want to keep this conversation alive, and I want you to think about a couple of things. How do you navigate and ensure you respect boundaries in your relationships and your interactions with others, whether in person or online? Have you ever encountered challenges in understanding consent and boundaries, and how did you address them? I'm going to leave a couple of these questions up on Spotify so we can keep this conversation going. I'm going to post them to my social media when I put this post up, so we really can, I think it is important. I mean, again, I have a little bit of a clearer understanding of consent and boundaries, especially with my background. But, it doesn't really stray too far from what I'm saying, at least in my belief. I mean, we're talking about the APA, we're talking about the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom. We're talking about the foundations that deal, like RAIN. You can look all these places up and see what they say and see if they align with how your thoughts are. And कि if they don't, you can start to figure out why your thoughts are so different and maybe even where they strayed. We have to remember that the journey to healthy relationships and understanding consent and boundaries is ongoing. And I do hope that this sparks a lot more thoughtful conversations and leads to a deeper understanding within the community. Please remember, I do have a book out, Tangled Desires, The Intersection of BDSM and Psychology. It's available for ebooks. Yes, I'm working on my edits. Eventually, I will have a hard book out. There is a couple people out of Europe that have asked me for it. I am working on it. So, Portugal, por favor, just wait. I will get it out there. And if you follow me on Spotify and you really like the show and help others find it, please rate my show 5 stars. This will allow other people, to follow me. If you're following me for the first time, please like and subscribe and follow my show. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay cool.